Madam President, I have 11 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I came to the floor this afternoon because the United States government is now less than a week away from defaulting on its obligations for the first time in our history. As we've heard from economists and business leaders across the country, a default could result in hundreds of thousands of lost jobs and in higher interest rates for every American. And yet, we're still debating whether or not we should avoid default. It is a very dangerous game, and we are risking permanent harm to the American economy. I want to just examine one consequence of default for a minute. All three credit rating agencies, S&P, Moody's, and Fitch, have said that a default would automatically result in a lower credit rating for the U.S. government. And I think we all understand the principle of credit rating. It's like the credit scores on record for most of us in our personal lives. The better we've been about paying our debts in the past, the better our credit score. When we go to buy a house or a car, when we ask for a loan, the bank looks at that credit score and decides how much interest to charge us. The worse we've been at paying our debts in the past, the lower our score, and the more money we pay in interest. Well, the credit rating agencies are keeping a credit score on the United States government. So far, it's been perfect. The U.S. has never failed to pay our debts. That's why we have the lowest interest rates in the world, and loaning money to the U.S. government is considered the world's safest investment. With the default, that would all change. And here's the key. It would change in just minutes, and that change would last for generations. If we default, the credit rating agencies will lower our credit rating immediately. I recently had a conversation with Martin Regalia, the chief economist of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. In that conversation, he said that the market reaction to a default would take nanoseconds. Once we've defaulted, we can never unring that bell. Our special status as the world's safest investment may never return. We will have increased our interest rates for decades to come and maybe even longer. J.P. Morgan Chase said this week that a lower credit rating could cost our government $100 billion a year in interest. And this is the worst kind of wasteful spending, because that money wouldn't be going to investments in our economy or to secure a better future for our children. It would go to nothing. It would do nothing. It would just be money down the drain. Now, we have a path forward. It's the plan that's recently been proposed by Senator Reid. There are a lot of things about this plan that I don't like. I'm concerned because I don't think it takes a balanced approach towards deficit reduction that I've long called for. And I'm disappointed that it lacks the $4 trillion in deficit reduction that we need. But I'm ready to support it. And because all of the cuts in this bill are cuts that Republicans have already supported, they should be prepared to support this plan too. The Reid plan would cut at least $2 trillion off of our debt while allowing us to avoid default through the end of next year. These two elements are crucial to avoid the lower credit rating that we've been hearing concerns raised about. We need to provide the markets with some long-term certainty that will avoid default, some proof that we can deal seriously with our long-term deficits and debt. A short-term 6-month increase, as proposed in the House, would just kick the can down the road. It won't prevent a lower credit rating. We need to end this constant threat of default, which is paralyzing our government and our economy. The Reid plan achieves this through a combination of cuts to our domestic spending, reduce spending on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and through targeted cuts to mandatory spending. It doesn't raise taxes, and it doesn't touch Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. Again, this is not a perfect plan. I've been on the floor many times in favor of a balanced package that includes cuts to spending, domestic, defense, and mandatory, but also includes increased revenues. The Reid plan doesn't achieve those goals, but I do have hope that we'll get there eventually. This is not a proposal that I would have written, but I'm one of 100 members of the Senate and one of 535 members of Congress. And I don't get everything I want. None of us here in Congress get everything we want. That's the nature of compromise. That's the nature of democracy. And that's why the framers of the Constitution created checks and balances in government. That's why they created 2 chambers in Congress and 3 branches of government. And when you're a leader in government, you just don't have the luxury of drawing a line in the sand and walking away. You've got to be prepared to stay at the table and to give something up. I've just laid out what I believe many of my colleagues are willing to give up in this proposal. Our demand for a comprehensive, balanced plan to reduce the deficit. In exchange, I'm willing to accept a plan that includes more cuts than any other plan on the table. And these are cuts that 40 of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have already supported. This is a plan that I think neither side is going to love, but both sides should be able to accept. It's a plan that gets the job done. Now, we here in the Senate and in Congress have to get the job done. So I urge that we come to the table, we adopt a compromise, and we put this debt ceiling vote behind us. Thank you very much, Madam President.